everything possible to recover. And for
Everyone panicked the moment they saw the tape. Elena Rybakina, sitting on the court in Cincinnati, her left ankle already strapped, her face doing that thing athletes' faces do when they're doing math they don't want to do. And the number going around within minutes was the scariest one in tennis, Achilles. That word alone can end a season. Sometimes it ends more than that. Here's my problem with the panic. It was built on 5 games of information and a single grimace. I've watched a lot of retirements in my time covering this sport, and I've learned that the first 90 seconds after an injury are the worst possible window to diagnose anything. Adrenaline lies. Fear lies louder. What actually tells you something is what happens 3, 4, 5 days later, when the swelling's gone down and the athlete has had time to sit with an MRI report instead of a jolt of pain mid-serve. So let's do this properly. Let's go back to the actual sequence because I think the real story here isn't Rybakina's hurt. It's why did this specific injury happen at this specific moment? And what does her response since tell us about how serious it actually is? Rybakina was up against Iga Swiatek in the Cincinnati Open quarterfinal, and this wasn't a nothing match for her. She was 2 wins away from world number one for the first time in her career, with Rybakina Sabalenka already out in the third round. That's the kind of opportunity that doesn't come around twice in a season. She was trailing 4-1 early in the first set when it happened. An awkward landing off a backhand, the kind of small mechanical accident that looks like nothing on a broadcast replay and feels like everything to the player it happens to. She took the medical timeout, she got the ankle taped, and then she came back out, hit exactly one serve, and pulled the plug. That single serve is actually the most important data point in this whole story, and almost nobody talked about it. If this were a full blown Achilles rupture, she doesn't hit a competitive first serve at all. The push off required for a WTA Tour service motion, especially on a big first delivery, would have been physically impossible. She hit one. It clearly hurt, but she hit it. That's not nothing. Afterward, she gave reporters a quote that everyone ran with, understandably, because it sounds alarming out of context. It's painful to walk. True. Also incomplete. What got buried underneath that headline was the second half of what she said, that this had been bothering me for a long period of time, but she felt like I had it under control. That's not the language of a sudden catastrophic injury. That's the language of load management gone wrong. That's a player who's been quietly managing something for weeks, pushing through it because the schedule didn't give her a real off ramp until one wrong step turned manageable into unmanageable. And when you actually look at her last month, that framing makes a lot more sense than the Achilles scare ever did. Rybakina made the final of the National Bank Open in Toronto just over a week before this Cincinnati retirement, losing to Swiatek 6-2, 6-3. That's not a light workload. That's a full title run through a WTA 1000 draw, followed almost immediately by another WTA 1000 draw in a different city, on the same hardcourt surface, under the same accumulated strain on the same joints. Elite tennis doesn't really have an off week built into a stretch like that. You play, you fly, you play again, and whatever's quietly complaining in your ankle doesn't get the memo that it's supposed to wait its turn. So here's the reframe I want to put in front of you, because I think it changes how you should be watching the next week of coverage. This wasn't a freak accident that came out of nowhere. This was a cumulative load injury that finally had its moment, and the wrong movement she described wasn't the cause, it was the trigger. The cause had been building for a month. Therefore, the more useful question isn't, is Rybakina's Achilles torn? It's how much of the underlying fatigue actually gets resolved in a week of rest, and how much just gets papered over by taping and painkillers long enough to get through a first round match. That question got at least a partial answer, and it's a more encouraging one than the initial panic suggested. The early Achilles fears that spread through the tennis press in the hours after the retirement have, according to more recent reporting out of New York, since eased. The MRI apparently didn't return the worst case scenario. What we're actually dealing with, by the accounts coming out closer to the tournament, sounds more like an ankle issue that's serious enough to force real caution, but not one that's automatically career altering or even necessarily tournament ending. And her own words back that up. Speaking to press in New York this week, she said she's doing everything possible to recover, that things have been going well, but that she hadn't yet been out on a practice court. She specifically said she wants to test it in the next few days rather than force it early. It seems okay, so hopefully it's going to be good for my first match. That's a very different tone from someone bracing for a withdrawal announcement. It's the tone of someone managing a real but recoverable issue on a tight but survivable clock. She's also been visible around the tournament build-up doing lower stakes appearances. An ice cream making event with Flavio Cobolli, Karen Kachanov, and Matteo Arnaldi, which tells you something too, honestly. If this were the kind of injury where every step is agony, you don't send an athlete out to stand around a promotional event on her feet for an hour. Tournaments and management teams are usually more protective than that when something's genuinely fragile, But, and this is the part I don't think gets enough attention, caution has a cost, and she's already paying part of it. She pulled out of the US Open mixed doubles event, where she'd been slated to play alongside Taylor Fritz. That's not a nothing decision. Mixed doubles at a slam isn't the priority for a top singles seed, but withdrawing from it this early, this deliberately, tells you her team is treating every non-essential match as a match not worth the risk. That's smart risk management. It's also a signal that whatever's going on in that ankle is real enough to change scheduling decisions, not just headline copy. Now, here's the variable that actually reframes the stakes of all this, and it's the one hiding in plain sight in the rankings math. This isn't just about whether Rybakina is healthy enough to play a first round match. It's about a title race that was already tightening before Cincinnati happened. Heading into that Swiatek quarterfinal, Rybakina had a live shot at world number one, something she has never held in her career, despite two Grand Slam titles and years near the top of the sport. Sabalenka's early exit in Cincinnati had cracked the door open. Two wins, and Rybakina walks through it. Instead, the retirement cost her ranking points on top of the missed opportunity. By some tallies, she actually lost around 175 points from the tournament, while Sabalenka's own early exit only cost about 95, which widened rather than closed the gap between them. Sabalenka currently sits around 575 points to Rybakina's roughly 8,141, a gap of a few hundred points that a healthy four-man run at the US Open could still close, but a compromised first round and out Rybakina obviously cannot. So every practice court sighting between now and her opening match isn't just an injury update. It's a title race update. That's why this story matters beyond the usual pre-slam health scare cycle. Let me get into what I'll actually be watching when she's on court, because she says it feels okay and it holds up under tournament pressure are two very different tests. The tell isn't going to be in how she looks walking to the baseline. It's going to be in her push off on the first serve, specifically on break points and second set service games, when fatigue starts compounding on top of whatever residual weakness is still sitting in that ankle. A player protecting an injury will often shorten their service motion slightly, take a little pace off in exchange for more controlled footing, and lean more heavily on placement over raw velocity. If you watch her radar gun numbers on serve drop by even 5 to 8 miles per hour compared to her Toronto final against Swiatek, that's your real-time confirmation that she's still managing this, not just talking her way through a press conference. The other tell is lateral movement on the ad side, since an ankle issue tends to show up hardest on the push-off for a wide slice or a scramble return, not on straight-line sprints, where the joint doesn't have to absorb a sideways load. Early rounds against lower ranked opponents will mask a lot of this. It's the moment she runs into someone who can actually stretch her corner to corner, likely somewhere in the second week, if she gets there, where the real diagnosis plays out in real time, in front of everyone, whether the MRI said mild or not. That's the actual tactical blueprint here, and it's the part I think gets skipped in most of this coverage, because it's more interesting to just repeat painful to walk in a headline than to explain what to actually look for. Watch the serve speed differential in her opening match compared to her Toronto final. Watch how she handles her first wide corner defensive slide under real pressure, not just a routine baseline rally. If both hold, this becomes a genuine world number one push riding a recovery story. If either one visibly breaks down, you'll know before any team statement confirms it. And so will Sabalenka, who suddenly has a much clearer runway to hold on to that top ranking a little longer than either of them probably expected 2 weeks ago.